Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again. Tonight we're jumping into some unsettling true horror stories that'll make you think twice about everyday encounters. So get comfortable, or maybe not too comfortable, and let's get started.
When I was 7, I fell for his line. Your mom asked me to pick you up and take you to her coffee shop. I got in the back and did up my seatbelt. I asked him his name, but he didn't answer. That's when I got scared and knew I did something bad. I began to fidget nervously and cry. The guy opened the glove compartment and pulled out some comic books. Told me not to worry, he'd have me home soon. I began to cry more because he was supposed to take me to my mom's coffee shop like he said. I remember at this point he staring, getting frustrated and not paying attention to the road because he almost hit a woman in the crosswalk. He slammed on his brakes and the comic books went sliding out of my lap. I unclipped my seatbelt so I could pick the comics back up, and the guy yelled at me to get the fuck back in my seat and shut up. His yelling scared me, so I started to cry again. I'm not sure if it was my crying or the guy almost hitting some woman with his car, but after looking at some of the pictures in the comic books, I noticed I was back at my school. All the man said was, "Get out, change of plans, leave the books." By this point it started to rain, so I walked back into the school. I went to the office to ask them to call my mom. I was shocked to see my mom in the office crying. There were a few cops, my principal, and my teacher. My mom picked me up and started crying harder. I proceeded to tell them what just happened. I guess my mom was just pulling up to the school when I got in the stranger's car. She ran straight to the office to call police while sending my uncle, who was in the car with her, to try and follow the guy. I don't know what the aftermath of that incident was. No one if my family really brought it up too much. But we always made sure someone was there to get me from that day out. If there was ever a day when someone else other than my mom had to get me, I had to wait in the office until that person came to get me. They'd have to bring ID too. I don't dare to think what would have happened to me if that man had gone through with kidnapping me.
I'm a male and was about 20 years old when I was hijacked. Middle of winter, lots of ice and snow, low visibility. I was driving my 92 Geo slowly down my home street, and it was about 3 a.m. My driver's window was down to help keep the windshield from fogging. A person steps out onto the ice, into the middle of the road, and stands there with his arms out like he's flagging me down for help. I stopped instead of trying to swerve around him on the ice. Plus, I figured it must be an emergency. It's a narrow street, and his friend comes out from between the parked cars on the side of the road. I didn't see Guy 2 until the razor blade was against my throat. He tells me to unlock the doors, then stands there while Guy 1 gets in the seat behind me. Then Guy 2 gets in the passenger seat and rests his arm on my seat near my shoulder, the hand with the razor hanging by my head. Guy 1 tells me everything is cool, just drive them where they want to go. I take his directions. He and I make idle chatter while I drive. Mostly on the highway to a part of town I didn't know. Guy 2 keeps threatening different ways he could cut me. Guy 1 keeps telling him to chill out. It's about a 45-minute drive, maybe more. They were both trashed, but I started to get an idea of what was happening. They met earlier that night at a bar, then went with a group to an after-party in my neighborhood. They got kicked out of the party and started looking for a ride. A ride to go across town to sell shower curtains. I didn't bother to ask what they were actually selling. So we get to this shitty neighborhood and pull down an alley, then up behind these rundown condos. I don't know why I wasn't terrified before, but I was then. Drug deals can go bad, you know? And I drove these guys there. Guy 2 goes in, Guy 1 is sitting behind me still chatting with me. Guy 2 comes back, no problems. He splits some money with 1, then we drive off. Guy 1 gives me some seemingly random directions, then points at a parking lot that he wants dropped off in. I stop, he gets out. Guy 2 thankfully gets out as well. 1 turns around and starts yelling at 2. "You're not going with me, motherfucker. I don't know you, get back in the fucking car." I lock my doors and roll up the stupid fucking window. Didn't hear anything distinct after that. And I still don't know why I stayed behind to watch them argue. I left real quick when 1 pulled a little revolver out of his pants and stuck the gun in 2's face. Went home, went to bed. I wrote this from mobile. I'll read it when I get home and fix any busted sentences or auto-incorrected words. Edit. Maybe they stole something from the house they were at, then had me drive them to sell it. Never thought about that before. I hope it was actually shower curtains. 13 years old. Walking down the street with 2 friends. We were heading to a park in the neighborhood across a busy street from my neighborhood, the direction we were coming from. Right after we crossed the street, this beat-up Suburban drives by and someone in the car yells out, "Drugs or dick?" We kind of looked at each other puzzled, shrugged it off, and kept on walking. Not too long after that, this Suburban made another appearance right in front of our path. One of my friends I was with recognized one of the guys inside as being one of her neighbors. She seemed to be flirting with him. She drew a smiley face on his arm with a Sharpie, and suddenly he flipped his shit. As in, he got out of the Suburban, threw her basically into this nearby ditch, and took that Sharpie and drew all over her face and arms and any skin that was exposed. So that was off-putting, and I really didn't know how to react. Let's call the friend that is now in the ditch Anna. Anna laid there for a bit, clearly bewildered, but she didn't seem that hurt. My second friend, who was there, that we'll call Andrew, was behind the Suburban, clearly freaked out. I was between him and Anna, kind of right next to the Suburban. Andrew and I are trying to make sure Anna is okay while also still being really unsure of what to expect from these guys, and all of a sudden, the driver gets out, picks me up, slings me over his shoulders, and just throws me in the back, through the double doors. I didn't see that coming. Both guys get back in the Suburban and they start driving off. I'm pretty much in shock. I look back and see Anna and Andrew, in complete shock as well, wondering if they were joking or how serious this matter would become. I look around me, and the first thing I see was what I would later find out was a potato launcher. I also saw a baseball bat, rope, and lots of tools. There was only one seat in the back, behind the passenger seat in the main cab, and that's where I sat. I was trying to pay attention to where we were going, so I would know how to get back to safety. Meanwhile, these guys are talking to each other like I'm not even there, asking each other where is a good spot to rape somebody and other fucked up things like that. At some point, they offer me a drink of something. It is in a water bottle and the liquid is slightly opaque, and I assume it is drugs. So in my super adrenaline D state, I say yes, but take the drink and throw it out of the open window. That was not wise. I was thinking I could take getting beat up, but I couldn't fight back if I was drugged. So fuck that scenario even happening. Fast forward a little bit, they pull into a secluded park. The kind of park you might drive by a million times and not even know it was there. The view of the park was shielded from the main road by a huge line of very dense trees. This was my first time learning about the park. I notice one car in the parking lot as they are pulling in. It is a family with two small children packing up and getting ready to leave. The two guys keep going past the parking lot and pull to the very end of this park. They were driving on grass to get there. They stop, they get out. They are totally ignoring me at this point, or acting like I'm so insignificant and such a non-threat to them. They are sharing a cigarette and just talking about whatever in front of the Suburban. I'm still in the seat behind the main passenger seat. I notice the door is locked, but the window is down. I think for a second, jump out of that window, and fucking run like the wind towards that car, family I had seen in the front of the park. I make it to them. They call 911. The two guys got in their Suburban to chase after me, of course, but I managed to dodge them by zigzag running and all that. They leave the park once they see me talking to that family. The cops come, and for some fucking reason they came back to the park. I guess they couldn't tell the cops were there from the road, and once they saw the cops saw them, so they got caught. They were in jail for about 2 weeks, and then they got 2 years probation. But then, one day I'm walking from my house to check the mail. Box was down the street. And what do I see? But none other than that fucking Suburban. Turns out one of the guys moved in 2 houses down from me, and I was like, hell fucking no, and got a restraining order real quick. I still saw that Suburban around town from time to time, and yes, it terrified me. Found out a couple years later, from Anna, that guy had died from an overdose. Wasn't sad at all. I think I almost got kidnapped. This happened during my freshman year of college. I was taking a theater appreciation class, and we had to attend some of the plays the theater department put on. Normally, I went with friends, but for this one, I had to go alone, since I had another event when my friends went. The play started at 6:30, so I set out on the short 10-minute walk to the theater. When I arrived, I saw a man standing by the entrance. Out of habit, I smiled at him. I tend to do that with strangers. He smiled back, but there was something about him that made me feel uneasy. He got in line right behind me, and while we waited, I overheard him muttering to himself about his car and where it was parked. I wasn't really paying attention until I heard him say, "Where are you sitting?" I thought he was talking to someone else, so I didn't respond. Once my ticket was scanned, I went in and found my seat. But then, to my surprise, the same man sat down right next to me. I heard him mumble, "I can't believe it," right next to me. His tone sent a chill through me, but I tried to ignore it. He was probably in his early 30s, and soon enough, he turned to me and started asking questions. Too many questions. "Do you come to these plays often?" he asked. I told him no. He quickly launched into how he was a regular and loved them, even mentioning that his girlfriend was in the play that night. I was still creeped out, but I felt a twinge of guilt for judging him so quickly. Maybe he was just being friendly. But then something strange happened. Everything I said. He had the same interests, the same experiences. It was unsettling. When he asked what kind of music I liked, I decided to mention Regina Spektor, a lesser-known artist, thinking he wouldn't know her. His response? "Oh, I love Regina Spektor. She's amazing. I listen to her all the time." It was too much. He was agreeing with everything I said, and the more he did, the more uncomfortable I felt. Right before the play started, a woman around his age sat on my other side. The moment she sat down, he went quiet. Then, oddly, the woman struck up the same kind of small talk with me. She even asked similar questions, almost as if they had compared notes. As she talked, she touched my arm a few times, in this weird, too familiar way, just like the man had done earlier. I felt trapped between them. Thankfully, the play started and everyone went silent. But I could still feel their eyes on me, watching me the whole time. At intermission, the man offered to get me something from the concessions. I declined, but he kept insisting. "I'll surprise you," he said, his tone a little too eager. I kept saying no, but he seemed frustrated and eventually got up to leave. As soon as he was gone, the woman picked up right where he left off, asking me about singing because she thought my voice sounded pretty. I told her I used to sing in high school but had stopped. Again, she touched my arm while she talked, more than once, and it made my skin crawl. When the man returned, he brought back some M&Ms and Milk Duds, both of which looked like they had already been opened. He offered me the Milk Duds, and I declined. He didn't eat them either, just placed them on the floor, like he wasn't sure what to do next. Then he started asking more personal questions, about my family and whether I came to college alone. I lied, telling him I lived with my brother, in an apartment far from where I actually stayed. That's when he leaned in and told me he was an amateur music producer, and that I had a great voice. I should come by his place sometime to record. He just happened to live near where I said I lived. It was all too much, and the tension in my chest wouldn't go away. Then his phone buzzed. He quickly looked at it and tried to hide the screen. But I saw the message. "She's really cute. Do you think she'll work?" My heart was racing. I wanted to bolt right then and there, but I didn't know what to do. The woman beside me suddenly touched my arm again, and whispered that she was going to the bathroom, suggesting I come with her. At first, I thought maybe she had noticed the man's odd behavior and was trying to help. But then I saw her phone light up in her lap with a message that read, "Yes." It was from an unsaved number. I felt my stomach drop. She never went to the bathroom. We all just sat there as the second half of the play dragged on. Tension thick in the air. Both of them kept glancing at me, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The moment the play ended, I got up and climbed over the woman, making my way to the exit as fast as possible. Once outside, I darted into the bathroom, trying to collect myself. When I finally came out, I saw the man and woman standing in the corner of the foyer, having what looked like a heated whispering argument. When the woman spotted me, she immediately stopped talking, and the man began walking toward me. "I can give you a ride to your apartment," he offered. I told him no, that my brother was picking me up. Just then, one of my classmates ran over, calling out to me, "Susie!" "Hey, Susie." Not my real name, but for privacy, let's go with that. The man backed off when he saw my friend. We left together, and as we walked out, I heard him yell behind me, "Susie, hope to see you again." I didn't look back. I just ran, staying on the phone with my mom the whole way home. Now, I can't stop wondering. Why did they act like they didn't know each other when they clearly did? Why did they both ask me the same creepy questions, touching my arm like they were trying to establish some weird familiarity? And what was with the texts? Were they communicating with each other about me the whole time? Where did that candy come from? Why was it already opened? Why didn't he eat it? And why did they keep acting like they were trying to separate me, asking if I wanted to go to the bathroom or ride with them? Am I paranoid, or was something seriously wrong? When I was 14, I was waiting for the bus at the end of my driveway, and this pickup truck pulled off the road onto the driveway. The drive kept waving me closer to the cab and held up a map book. At first he wouldn't roll down the window, but he did, and said he needed direction to wherever. I went closer to the window, and I didn't realize what was happening until he reached across and attempted to grab me by the hair. I dropped my book bag and ran for the house while he sped off. Woke my mom up and she flipped out. Went to the window to look out it and, surprise, surprise, the truck was sitting across the street, and we could see the dude looking up at the house, which made me flip out. I assume he saw my mom looking because he left rubber getting out of there. My mom called the cops and a patrolman showed up and took information on the truck. Me and my mom went to the police station and I talked to a detective and they did a composite sketch of the guy. The detective left to take a call and came back saying they had pulled someone over and wanted me to ID the driver. They put me in the back of an unmarked car with tinted windows and drove me past a guy who was being questioned outside his truck not too far from my home. It was him and I had my first panic attack in my life. I thought for sure he could see me. They charged him with attempted kidnapping and something else that I don't remember. It made all the local newspapers, but my mother wouldn't let me read them because they wanted me to testify, and I guess they didn't want whatever was there to, I don't know, spoil my testimony. They pulled him over, BTW, in front of an elementary school where he was idling. I ended up testifying for the DA via videotaped interview. He was acquitted because he claimed he was deaf or something. I never quite understood how that worked. Found out later that he had been arrested for similar things and some sex crimes. But this was before the sex offender registry. Also found out why they didn't want me to read the papers. When they searched his truck, they found rope, duct tape, a bunch of sex toys, Vaseline, and an axe. It certainly could have been a coincidence, but my family filed a restraining order against him, and apparently he was ordered to stay away from schools. It wrecked me for a while. I had trouble going to school because I kept having panic attacks. I kept thinking I saw his truck everywhere, and I kept hiding from windows and the like. Had a lot of nightmares and got diagnosed with PTSD. For a long time, I had trouble getting past what might have happened if I hadn't gotten away. When I was 13, I was on vacation in Egypt. While we were there, we went to this really crowded market. Later on, we are kind of sitting around people watching when I decide I wanted to go buy some ice cream at a corner stall that kind of wrapped around the corner of this building. So, I go to pay, and this guy tells me to go around the corner to use the register over there. Reluctantly, I go over there and try and pay again. All the while, some little kid walks up to my parents and starts distracting them. This time, he says to go pay inside at this shop a block down and to go up the stairs. After he says this, a huge Egyptian guy starts nudging me away from the counter and down that block, and some lady comes out of the store down the street and starts trying to wave me over. At this point, I'm freaking out because this all seems very strange but hadn't quite got a grasp on what was happening. Next thing you know, my stepmom puts out a cigarette on this big Egyptian guy's arm and grabs me, and my dad runs up to the counter and more or less screams at the guy that he'll pay here. The big guy just walks away like nothing happened. The lady scurries off back inside, and the guy serving my ice cream went from happy to neutral. I was in shock for a few hours. I could have been some slave boy in Cairo. I was 7. My friend, who we will call Dan, had just turned 8 a few days before. It was the summer of 1988, and Dan and I were playing at basketball at the local park with the new basketball he had gotten from his parents. The basketball court at our park was on the back corner and was backed up against the street and a fenced-in field, while being out of view to most of the rest of the park, due to the hills between it and the rest of the park. A maroon Buick Regal from the late 70s pulled up, and 3 guys got out of the car. We did not pay much attention to them because it was a public park, and we were used to older guys coming and taking over the basketball courts, considering we could barely throw the ball high enough to make a shot. One of the guys walked around to the back of the court and stood in the back entrance, and then one of the other 2 guys came into the court as the other guy stood in the front entrance. We continued to ignore them and played basketball on our half of the court. The guy that came in took the ball and said we were going to come with him. We freaked out and started trying to run to the other side of the court. He caught Dan and took him over to one of his buddies. Then he threw the ball and hit me in the back, knocking me over. He picked me up, and they put us in the back seat of the Regal. 2 of the guys sat back there with us. We were screaming and yelling, but no one was around at 11:08 a.m. that day. They drove us about 10 miles north of the city limits to an old dirt road, then drove another 3 or 4 miles down that dirt road to an old 2-story house. It had one of those old basements with bulkhead doors. They literally threw us down there, then locked the doors on us. It was dark and smelled like something had died. We heard them drive off. Dan had one of those squeeze lights that looked like a Bic lighter he had bought earlier that morning when we went to the convenience store and bought breakfast. We looked around the room a bit, and there was a bunch of canning stuff down there. We tried to push the door open with no luck. The day went along, and we were stuck. It never entered my mind at the time that we were in serious danger. In fact, the only thing I was worried about was getting in trouble if I did not come home to check in. Evening came and we heard another vehicle drive up. Then we heard the Regal drive up as well. We could hear the guys and someone else yelling out in the yard. Then the door to the house slammed. We could hear people walking around the wooden floored house. The sun went down and we began to really freak out. We knew that if we yelled, the guys who brought us here would come get us, and that would be worse than just being left alone. The flashlight was about dead from an entire day's worth of use. But we had found a phone Jack had been run down there, and we also found a broken old phone. We plugged it in and got a dial tone, but we could not dial out. Dan remembered watching a MacGyver earlier, and they called 911 by using hanging up the phone in a sequence of 9 short times. Then a pause, then another short click, followed by a pause, and then another short beep. It took us about an hour to get it to work, and the police answered. We were in full-on panic at that point, but we told them where we were and what had happened. They asked us who our parents were and how they could get a hold of them. We gave them their numbers. They said to try to hide and wait, so we did. After 5 minuets, we heard some faint sirens in the distance, and they sounded like they were getting closer. Then they stopped. About 10 minuets later, we heard a few cars pull up. Then a police officer on a loudspeaker, "Come out with your hands up, you are surrounded." About 20 minuets went by, then we heard someone banging on the cellar doors. We hid just in case it was not a cop, but the doors flew open and the brightest lights I had ever seen were shining in on us. 3 cops came in with guns pointed and identified us. They carried us out and put us in an unmarked police car. My mom was in the front seat and Dan's mom was in the back seat. For about 8 months, well into the school year, we would have to go to court and testify about what happened on occasion. I believe to this day that that smell was the smell of someone else they had kidnapped and had killed. The 3 guys ended up getting 15-year sentences, and the people that lived at the house got like 3 years in prison for not reporting the guys. The guys who kidnapped us did not really say much to us. They were rough, but nothing sexual. It was not until I was an adult that I realized what had happened and the danger I was in. I was happy that I did not realize what had happened because me and Dan went on and lived the rest of our childhood out as normal kids. We were just a bit more cautious of people. I got very, very lucky. The 2 men who kidnapped me from a bus stop, I was 16, had clearly done so with others before. They'd removed the door handles from the back seat doors, so when I tried to make my way out at a red light, I couldn't get the door open. I'm pretty sure they intended to kill me after they raped me. They drove me to an abandoned gas station and began assaulting me. But about an hour into the experience, a police car drove up to check out what was happening. The man in the back seat with me at that time threatened to slit my throat if I screamed, while his partner got out and convinced the cop that I was his niece, and that he and my dad brought me out to talk to me. He said they needed to set me straight because I'd been acting out. The cop insisted they leave the station right then, and he followed our car back to the highway. They got so worried he'd remember them if my body turned up the next day that they decided to release me right then. I got thrown down a gravel embankment along the highway and ran in the dark to a nearby open restaurant. I will never forget lying there in the wet grass after coming to rest at the bottom of the embankment, gazing up at a sky filled with stars and realizing that, holy shit, I was somehow still alive. Injured and anguished and violated and sorrowful, but alive and able to find a way through the trauma. I was very, very lucky. I witnessed a R-word in kidnapping. It happened March of 2012. I was getting gas at a gas station in a not terrible but not great part of Knoxville, TN. I was pumping, and a friend with me was inside buying snacks. I saw a pretty girl walking down the road across the street from me. A few seconds later, a car pulled up next to her and started following along slowly, like they were talking to her. Suddenly, 3 big guys jump out and grab her. They shove her, screaming, into the back seat of the car. Then the car pulls around the side of a little auto shop right there, followed by another car that blocked the driveway and acted as lookout. From where I was, I could still see everything that was happening. They raped her right there in the parking lot. She was screaming and fighting inside the car, causing it to rock violently. After a few minutes, both cars took off down the road at easily 80 plus. The instant I realized what was going on, I called 911. I gave the cops descriptions, plate numbers, and a play-by-play of everything that was happening. They never showed up. Let me say that again. A violent rape has occurred and the cops never bothered to show up. They never called back, never took a statement, never tried to pursue. Nothing. And that's the story of why I got my permit and started carrying a firearm. Probably too late to post this, but oh well. A few years ago, a guy started to walk next to me as I walked to Soch from the bus stop, asking me my name, my school, age, etc. He used the pretense that he wanted to know the time, but I wasn't stupid, and I knew what he was up to. He was trying to figure out my timetable and such. Then a few weeks later, I'm walking back home a few hours later than usual, and just as I'm passing this opening to a nature park, this same guy pops up again, kind of disguised but still recognizable to me. Immediately I know what's going to happen. It's really dark, and he's walking super close. But there's no one around, and I can't think of something to do quick enough. He quickly grabs my arm and pushes me into the gate to the woods, while saying, "I think it's quicker to walk this way." I just start screaming as loud as possible and running towards the road, but he's quicker and covers my mouth, telling me that if the police come, I'm fucking dead. I try dig my heels into the ground or fight him off, but I'm around 5'5" and he had my arms behind me, so he managed to drag me into this pitch-black, muddy, foresty area. I start debating in my head whether to fight him when he inevitably rapes me, or to just go limp and let it happen. I also remember thinking that if he didn't kill me after it was over, that I had to go straight to the police station and get them to get the DNA evidence. Thankfully, before he'd even had a chance to do anything or even grope me, a couple nearby on the road had noticed how closely the guy had been walking behind me, and when they'd heard me screaming before he'd shut me up, ran shouting down the road looking for me. The wannabe rapist got scared and legged it when he heard them shouting, and I stumbled out of the woods looking for the people who'd just stopped me getting assaulted. I remember being really embarrassed about crying, and the police thought I was in shock because I wasn't freaking out afterwards, just being practical. Pretty scary, but like I say to anyone I speak to about it, at least the dude didn't actually get to do anything, really. Oh, I will never forget. I was about 8 or 9 years old walking home from my best friend's house back to my house. A guy pulled up beside me wearing a police uniform. Seemed totally legit, but who knows. But he was driving a super shitty sedan. I guess like one of those old Buick like boat cars. He's really aggressive and assertive, saying to get in the car. I need to go with him right now. My dad is at the hospital and sent this guy to come get me. My mom was in an accident, but he is here to take me to her. I totally lost my shit, felt super sketched out, and I just burst out crying. And as this guy is shouting at me to get in the car, I panicked and just started sprinting all the way home. I get home and my dad is watering the garden, cool as anything, and I am completely losing my shit, absolutely hysterical. He calms me down, hears the story, is like WTF. So calls 911 with the description, and sure enough, they catch this guy with a 13-year-old girl in the back seat who he managed to talk into going with him. I was about 9 years old and I was selling lemonade at a local park with my friend. We were both cute little girls, but I was the one mostly in view as I was dealing with customers while she poured lemonade in the back. After a long day, we walked about 3 blocks to get home. While walking on the sidewalk, a car blocked our path because he came out of the alley. He signaled to me, so I figured he wanted lemonade. My friend waiting behind and I walked up to the car. He said, "You're selling lemonade, huh?" And I said, "Yes." He then asked me, "Have you ever seen one of these? Come here," and pointed to his hard dick that he had taken out of his pants. I looked and ran like hell and screamed at my friend to run, who had no idea what was going on. When the police questioned me at our house, I remember the officer asking me, was his penis erect or not? I didn't know what that meant at the time, so I replied, well, he wasn't old, so it wasn't wrinkly. I then remember everyone laughing, and even though it was mildly funny, I was not amused. This happened about 2 years ago, while my boyfriend and I were on a road trip from Texas to California. We had a packed schedule, so we opted for long stretches of driving with minimal stops. One evening, somewhere in Arizona, we were running low on gas and pulled into a small, dingy gas station. There were no other cars around, just an old van parked in the back corner of the lot. While my boyfriend was filling the tank, I went inside to grab snacks. The cashier gave me a weird vibe, didn't say a word, just stared at me the entire time I was in there. As I was paying, I noticed the van guy was now inside the store, hovering near the door. He didn't buy anything, just stood there, pretending to look at the chips but watching me. I quickly paid and hurried back to the car. When I told my boyfriend, we both agreed to leave immediately. We pulled out of the gas station, but as soon as we hit the highway, I noticed the van pulling out behind us. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then 20 minutes passed, and it was still right behind us, matching our speed. We decided to test it out. We switched lanes, slowed down, sped up. No matter what we did, the van stayed right on our tail. At this point, my heart was racing. It was pitch black outside, and there was no one else on the road. We hit the gas, trying to lose them, but they kept up. Then, out of nowhere, my boyfriend slammed on the brakes. The van swerved to avoid us and sped off, disappearing into the darkness. We didn't stop until we reached a more populated area, but for the rest of the trip, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. It wasn't until days later that it really hit me. If my boyfriend hadn't braked when he did, who knows what could have happened. To this day, we have no idea what those people in the van wanted, and honestly, I don't want to find out. It was late on a Friday night when my friend Mark and I decided to take a ride downtown to grab some food. We parked our car and walked towards a nearby taco truck, the neon lights flickering invitingly. After ordering, we noticed a man standing alone nearby, his eyes darting between us and the road. He was disheveled and looked like he hadn't slept in days. As we ate, he approached us, mumbling something about needing a ride. We exchanged glances, debating whether to help him or not. The area had a reputation for rough crowds, but he looked harmless enough. Mark, always the good Samaritan, shrugged and said, "Why not?" As we piled into the car, the man immediately became more animated. He thanked us profusely and began sharing strange stories about his life. The atmosphere shifted when he mentioned a bad deal he had made earlier that day. His eyes grew wild, and he leaned forward, his breath heavy with the smell of alcohol. "Just drop me off a few blocks from here," he insisted, almost too urgently. A knot formed in my stomach as I glanced at Mark, who shrugged and drove toward the destination the man indicated. Suddenly, the man pulled out a knife, jabbing it toward Mark. "Drive faster!" he shouted, and panic flooded the car. I could barely breathe as Mark floored the accelerator, praying to make it out alive. We sped through red lights, my heart pounding as the man screamed at us. He ordered Mark to take us to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I felt hopeless, trapped in a nightmare. When we finally arrived, Mark slammed the brakes and we jumped out, running for our lives. The man stumbled after us, but as we turned the corner, we heard him scream in frustration. We made it to a nearby gas station, where the clerk called the police. The man was arrested later that night, found still wandering the streets, desperate and angry. We were lucky to escape with our lives. I was driving home late one night after visiting my friend in the next town. The roads were dark and deserted, with only my headlights cutting through the shadows. I usually took the highway, but that night, I decided to take a shortcut through an unfamiliar back road to save time. As I turned onto the narrow lane, I noticed the trees were thicker and the air felt heavy. My phone's GPS started acting up, and the signal dropped. I felt a wave of unease but pushed it aside, convincing myself it was just a quiet area. About 10 minutes in, my car started sputtering. I pulled over, panic rising as I realized I was in the middle of nowhere. No lights, no houses, just darkness. I got out to check the engine, hoping it was something minor. Just as I was leaning over the hood, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. A man emerged, looking disheveled and wild. "Need help?" he asked. A strange smile plastered across his face. My instincts screamed at me to get back in the car, but I was desperate. Yeah, my car won't start," I said hesitantly. He approached too quickly and my heart raced. "Let me take a look," he said. Before I could react, he shoved me away from the car and hopped inside. "Hey, what are you doing?" I screamed, trying to grab the door, but he slammed it shut and locked it. "Just a little ride," he grinned, revving the engine. I dashed around the car, pounding on the windows, begging him to let me out. Instead, he took off down the road, laughing. I felt the adrenaline surge as I realized I had to fight back. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed a rock from the side of the road and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and the man jumped, startled. I lunged inside, grappling with him as we fought for control. I managed to kick him out, and he stumbled back, cursing as I jumped into the driver's seat. Heart racing, I sped away, not looking back until I reached the highway. That detour taught me a valuable lesson. Always trust your instincts and never accept help from strangers, especially in the dark. I was a college student and often hitchhiked to save money when my friends were busy. One sunny afternoon, I was at the side of the road, thumb out, when a rusty pickup truck pulled up. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, waved me over. "Need a ride?" he asked. He seemed harmless enough, and I was tired of waiting. "Sure." I climbed in and we chatted about the usual things: school, work, and life. He seemed nice, and I felt comfortable. But then, he missed my stop. "Hey, you just passed my place," I said, looking out the window in confusion. "Oh, don't worry. I know a shortcut. It'll be faster," he replied, an odd glint in his eye. Panic started to rise in my throat. I told myself to stay calm. "Maybe I should just get out here," I suggested, but he shook his head. No, just trust me." Suddenly, I felt the truck speed up. "Where are we going?" I asked, my heart racing. "You'll see," he said, laughter lacing his voice. I realized this was no ordinary ride. I scanned the interior for anything I could use to defend myself. I spotted a crowbar wedged between the seats. With every ounce of courage, I grabbed it. "Pull over," I shouted, raising the crowbar. He laughed again, but it was now a nervous laugh. "You wouldn't want to do that." "Try me!" I yelled, adrenaline surging through me. To my surprise, he slammed on the brakes, and I lunged for the door, flinging it open and leaping out. I tumbled onto the gravel road, rolling to safety as he shouted in rage. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I found a nearby gas station. I told the clerk what happened, and they called the police. I gave my statement and felt relief wash over me. The authorities later caught the man. I never hitchhiked again. That day taught me the importance of being aware of my surroundings and trusting my gut. It was a typical Thursday when I went out for a jog in my neighborhood. I loved the routine and often listened to music to pass the time. As I jogged down the familiar route, I noticed a van parked on the side of the road, the sliding door wide open. As I passed, a woman waved at me. "Excuse me, can you help me? My dog jumped out," she called, her voice frantic. I paused, unsure. "I'm sorry, I can't help right now," I shouted back, but she stepped closer, pleading. "Please, I think he went into the woods." I felt bad for her, but something didn't feel right. I started to jog again when I heard a loud noise behind me, like someone shouting. I turned to see two men emerging from the van. My heart raced as I sprinted down the street, panic fueling my speed. I could hear them shouting something, but I didn't dare look back. I took a sharp turn into a small alley, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I ducked behind a dumpster, trying to calm my racing heart. I could hear their footsteps getting closer. My mind raced with fear. Would they find me? After what felt like an eternity, I peeked out and saw them searching the area. They seemed agitated, shouting for the woman. I knew I had to get out of there. I slipped out of the alley and made my way toward the main road, but the panic was still there. I turned a corner and stumbled into a convenience store, breathless and wide-eyed. The cashier looked up, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked. I quickly explained what happened, and he called the police. They arrived minutes later, but the men and the woman were long gone. I was shaken, but grateful I had trusted my instincts. I learned that day that not every call for help is genuine, and it's crucial to prioritize my safety above all else. I hadn't seen my childhood friend Sarah in years. We grew up together, sharing everything from secrets to dreams. So when I got a message from her asking to meet, I was thrilled. We decided to meet at a cafe downtown. On the day of our reunion, I arrived early and waited anxiously. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked different, worn out and troubled. I felt a wave of concern wash over me. We chatted over coffee, and she shared that she had fallen on hard times, struggling with addiction. I wanted to help, but I was unsure how to approach the topic without pushing her away. "Can you give me a ride home? I'm feeling a bit anxious," she suddenly asked. "Of course," I replied, eager to help. As we walked to my car, I felt a strange tension in the air. Sarah was unusually quiet. I brushed it off, thinking she was just overwhelmed. Halfway to her house, she suddenly told me to take a detour. "I just want to show you something." I hesitated but complied. As we drove deeper into a sketchy neighborhood, I started to feel uneasy. "Sarah, are you sure this is the right way? Trust me," she said, her voice flat. When we reached an abandoned warehouse, she turned to me, her expression shifting. "I need you to help me with something." Panic surged through me. "What do you mean?" She pulled out a knife, and my blood ran cold. "I need you to help me get back what's mine." "What? Sarah, this isn't funny!" I shouted, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. "Get out of the car!" she commanded, and I felt my heart race. I knew I had to act fast. I made a split-second decision, hitting the gas and driving away. I glanced in the rearview mirror to see her yelling, but I didn't stop. I sped back to the main road, shaking with adrenaline. I dropped her off at a safe spot and told her I couldn't see her again. It broke my heart, but I knew I had to protect myself. That reunion reminded me that sometimes the people we once cared about can become unrecognizable, and it's essential to put our safety first. I had just moved to a new city and was eager to meet people. One night, I was scrolling through a social media group for locals when I noticed a post inviting people to a housewarming party. It seemed harmless, and the host had good reviews from others in the group, so I decided to go. The address was in a neighborhood I didn't know well, but I was excited to make new friends. As I arrived, I was struck by the size of the house. It was enormous and had an eerie air about it. I knocked, and a man in his 30s answered with a warm smile. "Welcome. Glad you could make it." Inside, the atmosphere felt off. The other guests were quiet, glancing at me with strange expressions. I tried to mingle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the night progressed, I realized the drinks were getting stronger, and people were starting to disappear into the back rooms. I excused myself to find the bathroom, but I couldn't find it. Instead, I stumbled upon a locked door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I rattled the handle. It was locked tight. Suddenly, the host appeared behind me. "Oh, that's off limits," he said, his smile fading. I felt a chill run down my spine. "I was just looking for the bathroom," I stammered. "Follow me, I'll show you," he said, grabbing my arm a bit too firmly. Panic surged. I pulled away and headed toward the front door, but he blocked my path. "You shouldn't leave yet. The fun is just beginning." In a flash, I shoved past him and bolted outside. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys as I glanced back to see him watching from the doorway. I jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sped away, adrenaline pumping. That night taught me to trust my instincts. I never attended another social event without thoroughly vetting the host first. The fear of what could have happened lingered, a reminder to always prioritize my safety. It was a Saturday night, and I decided to go for a late-night run to clear my head. I loved running at night. The streets were quieter, and the cool air felt refreshing. As I jogged through my neighborhood, I noticed a black van parked at the end of the street. The side door was open, and a man was leaning against it, watching me intently. I felt a twinge of unease, but brushed it off. I picked up my pace, focusing on my breathing. As I turned a corner, I glanced back to see the man now standing in the middle of the street, still watching me. My heart raced, and I decided to change my route. I cut through a nearby park, hoping to lose him. As I ran deeper into the shadows, I heard footsteps behind me. My instincts kicked in, and I sprinted faster. Suddenly, I tripped over a tree root and fell hard to the ground, scraping my knee. Before I could get up, I saw the man approaching, a menacing grin on his face. "Need a hand?" he asked mockingly. I scrambled to my feet and ran, adrenaline coursing through me. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I spotted a group of people in the distance and ran toward them, desperate for safety. As I approached, I yelled for help, and the man stopped in his tracks, looking furious. "Get away from her!" one of the bystanders shouted, and the man turned to flee, disappearing into the darkness. I collapsed on the ground, shaking. The strangers comforted me and called the police. They arrived quickly and took my statement. That night changed me. I realized how quickly things could turn dangerous. From then on, I never ran alone at night again. It was a harsh reminder that not everyone has good intentions, and safety should always come first. It was a summer weekend, and the annual music festival was in full swing. I was excited to see some of my favorite bands and enjoy the vibrant atmosphere. My friends and I arrived early, securing a great spot near the stage. As the day went on, I lost track of time. I wandered off to grab some food, fully immersed in the festival vibes. I didn't think much when a man approached me, asking if I wanted to check out a hidden stage nearby. He seemed friendly and enthusiastic, and I thought it could be a fun adventure. We walked through the crowd, and I quickly realized we were heading away from the main area. My gut twisted with unease. "Are we almost there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Just a bit further," he replied, but his smile seemed forced. After a few minutes, I noticed that the festival's sounds had faded, replaced by an eerie quiet. "This doesn't seem right," I said, stopping in my tracks. Suddenly, he turned to me, his demeanor shifting. "You really should have stayed with your friends," he said, stepping closer. Fear gripped me. I turned to run, but he grabbed my wrist. I struggled against him, adrenaline surging as I yanked free. I dashed back the way we came, pushing through festival goers, shouting for help. I finally spotted my friends near the main stage, relief flooding through me. I rushed over, breathless and panicked, telling them what happened. We informed security, who quickly found the man and removed him from the festival grounds. That day taught me to be more cautious about whom I trusted, especially in crowded places. The thrill of the festival was forever tainted by the reminder that danger could lurk behind a friendly face. After months of searching, I finally landed a job interview at a small marketing firm. I was excited, but also nervous. The interview was scheduled for an afternoon at a coffee shop, which seemed unconventional, but manageable. When I arrived, I saw a man in a suit waiting at a table. He smiled and waved me over. "You must be your name." "I'm Mark. Glad you could make it." I sat down, and he started asking me questions about my resume. He seemed charming and professional, but something felt off. He kept glancing around as if he were expecting someone. Halfway through the interview, he suggested we move to a quieter spot outside. I hesitated but agreed, thinking it would help me focus better. As we walked to a secluded bench, I started to feel uneasy. "Let's go for a drive. I have something to show you," he suddenly suggested. Alarm bells rang in my head. I think I'd rather stay here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He leaned closer, his demeanor shifting. "Don't be like that. It'll be fun." I felt trapped. I needed to get out of there. In a moment of panic, I stood up and bolted, running back toward the entrance. I could hear him calling after me, but I didn't stop. I rushed inside and found the barista, breathless. "Help! He's trying to kidnap me!" The barista called security, and they apprehended Mark before he could reach me. I gave my statement to the police, who assured me they'd investigate. That day reminded me of the importance of trusting my instincts. I was grateful to have escaped unscathed, and vowed never to compromise my safety for an interview again.